So what happened in the Tanya was that Perek Dal, Hey, and Vav talked about Toshav Hey. That Tshuva is not just the nigla of Tshuva, which is to return to Hashem, not going to sin anymore, or whatever it is, Tshuva Nechayna, Tshuva Shleima, the various different levels that include also fasts, but it means returning to the Eibush, the energy that's been displaced. In order to explain this, the Rebbe goes into a whole thing about the Chelek Havaya Amei, that Yidden are part of Hashem, and because the Yidden are part of Hashem, they are connected to Hashem, right? And the connection to Hashem is not only in general, but in the particulars, not just Vayipach, that we have the same connection to godliness in general, but we have Yud Kei Vav, and he says that even in the Guf, we continue to be attached. Then he continues to say there's a very big chilek between how it was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash and how it is now. Time of the Beis Hamikdash we were attached, but when we cut off, cut off in part, cut off whole, cut off. That was Perek Hey.
There's no tshuva whatsoever.
It's so hard to say that. When you read the Yegeres HaTshuva, you get that impression, but it's schwer zu sagen. Let's leave it open-ended. And the Perek Vav says, but now in times of Golus, that Kedusha fell to Makam HaKlippus. So first of all, we could be Yainik from Klippus. Even if we do Avedis, we could get still Chayas.
You see people, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you see people in the time of the Beis Hamikdash that did tshuva. Menashe or Achov did tshuva.
But the fact remains that Ein Lechelik Al Mabah. In other words, they did tshuva, but there's an effect, the Kodesh and the Mise. Okay, I completely agree. I mean, there's no question in my mind that in the time of the first Beis Hamikdash did tshuva. But evidently it was a different concept. Whether you have in the Gedetei, Alter Rebbe says that a person could do tshuva for Kodesh. He says, for example, if you could imagine a surgery where a person whose head has been cut off from his body, you could put it back on and the person will live.
You can't really do it. So
huh?
I understand.
You can't really do it. It's a mashal. It's a mashal. But in Ruchni Yisrael Yonim, you could do it. I cannot have Rachmanis on myself anymore, so you have Rachmanis on me. That's what says Chassidus. I
have Rachmanis that you don't have Rachmanis. So you feel bad that you don't have.
Right. But okay, that's I don't know how to resolve it. The bottom line is that in the times of Golus, we've fallen into Klippa, and we could be Yenik Chayes from Klippa. Not only that, since Klippa leeches off us, we're Netel Chelik Bereish, so therefore we could live longer, on the one hand. But on the other hand, another critical component of Klippa, of Golus, is the idea of Golus HaShechina. That the Chayes Eliki that we get from the Eibishter comes into Golus. If the Chayes Eliki, which is really the Hay, would remain Bim Koimo, and we do an Aveda, we'd be cut off from our source. Right? In the time of Golus, it's not the Pshat again, I've cut off from our source. Our source itself goes into Golus, which is terrible. But then there's a concept of Tshuva, Tosh of Hay, to put the source back where it belongs. And of course, there's two Hays, the lower Hay and the higher Hay. So Tosh of Hay is Hay Tataz, return the lower Hay to its place, which is connected to Maisa HaMitzvahs. And Tosh of Hay, the higher Hay, has to do with Kavanas HaMitzvahs. In other words, the lower Hay has to do with action, the higher Hay has to do with what we understand and what we feel. Very, very end of Perek Vav. Mamish, in the last lines of Perek Vav, the Alter Rebbe finally gets back to Tshuva. After he explains to us the whole arichas of the difference in the time of the Beis Hamikdash and times of Golus, in terms of the possibility of doing Tshuva, he finally goes back and says, in the times of Golus you could do Tshuva, and then you have Toshav Hay. So in Perek Zayin he starts telling you about Tshuva. But I want you to know like this, there's two Tshuvas. Tshuva Tata is Perek Zayin and the first half of Perek Ches, and Tshuva Ilah is the second half of Perek Ches, from here, from 5 lines from the bottom of Miyachet, and then Perek Tes and Perek Yud is Tshuva Ilah. And Yud Aleph and Yud Beis is basically the Alter Rebbe being a cheerleader, telling you that you can always fix whatever you did. So now we're going to learn about Tshuva Tata. Perek Zayin says the Rebbe Ulam, however, the true and straight path for the lesser Tshuva. There's two parts how a person does Tshuva. Aleph, the first thing that is necessary when a person is doing Tshuva is to arouse Rachmanas. As they say in some circles, have mercy on your soul. Have Rachmanas on yourself. From the source of Rachmanas, which is of course from Keser Haid and Ishdashmas. Al Nishmasi on your Nishama, V'nafshe L'kis in your godly soul. Shenafal that has fallen, Me'igra Rama from a tall mountain. What is the tall mountain that is its source? Chayeh Chayim Baruch Hu, the Eibishter, who's the source of all living things, and it has fallen, L'bi'ramik into a deep pit. And what is the deep pit? Heinech Chal Zatum of Sitra Achar. This is the chambers of Tum and Sitra Achar. So first of all, the mere fact that your neshama comes into this goof is already a gavazak in the field. And second of all, the fact that we may have done Avedis, and even Avedis Achamurim, the Rachmanis is even more compounded. So first of all, you have Rachmanis on your neshama, and second of all, V'alma Koida, you have Rachmanis on the source of your neshama, which is of course the Hei Tata, which goes into Golus with us, which is B'mekei Rachayim, in the source of life, Hu Shem Havaya Baruch Hu, which is the name of the Eibishter Baruch Hu, and it's a Rachmanis, not just an hour neshama, and Rachmanis also on the Hei Tata and Malchus of Atilas that goes into Golus with us. So K'mei Shekasa, he brings in the pasuk. Yoshev al Havaya, we have to return to Havaya, v'irachameu, and have Rachmanas on us. And I suppose it means you have to return Havaya to Havaya, v'irachameu, to have Rachmanas on us. Pirush, what does that mean? La'eda, to arouse Rachamim, Rachmanas, not only on yourself, but on Al Hashpah, Shem Havaya Baruch Hu, the flow of life that comes to Shem Havaya Baruch Hu. And specifically, Heitato, Shenishtasha, which has descended through a chain reaction, V'yarda, and descended to Heicholos, through the chambers of Klippa, Hatmeim, which are spiritually unclean, La'achiyazim, to give them life, through the actions of man and his schemes, and his bad thoughts. As the pasuk says, Melech Asur Barihitim, a king is locked up in chains, in the chains of the bad thoughts that people think, and so forth. It says, this is a concept of the Eibishter being in Golos as well. So the first part of tshuva, and specifically tshuva tata, which is to put the hey tata back to where it belongs, which has been exiled to our misdeeds. Not only are we getting chayes from Klippa, but our source, the of Malchus of Atzilus, goes into Golos with us, is through being me'edei rachamim rabim upon it. It's the rachmanis on yourself and on Shem Havaya Baruch. Okay, and you'll see later on that this rachmanis, along with something else, arouses the rachmanis of the Eibishter. Continues the Rebbe, and he says, the fixed time to have rachmanis on your neshama, on the nelakus which has gone into Golos, he betikin chatzos. When a person says tikin chatzos, when you wake up in the morning and you're mourning for chorban mabayis, you should mourn for Golos Hashchina, because it's one and the same thing. Kish Mashallah Mita, you do tshuva for your own averes. Tikin chatzos, you do tshuva for the fact that the Eibishter is in Golos. Okay, this is brought in the Siddur Ayin Sham Baruch. The Alter Rebbe Siddur, he has a note. V'zehu shakos of Sham. And this is what it says in Tikkun Chatzos. Nafla ateres reishenu. The crown of our head has fallen. Oy no lanu. Woe is to us, ki chatanu, because we sinned. What does that mean? Ateres reishenu means our spiritual source. Hey tatosh china, which has gone into Golos. Because of our Avedis, not only have we caused that our chayas should go away into Golos, but the chayas of Alakus should go into Golos. And when we're doing tshuva, we're having rachmanis, not just on ourselves, but the need to tell the key. Which is why the Eibush is called the king who has been shamed. The Pirkei Acholos in the Medish, which is a Kabbalah Medish. Well, Pirkei Acholos, because what Ramak says, top of Fetzari Zayin now, there can be no greater shame than this. That you take the Eibush and you lower him into Golos. And Tanya Perikov Dawid at the end, he gives a very graphic mashal of Eiches Bereishis Shal Melech, that you know Meiridei, that the Taimnei, Betzakitze Molei Tzeiah She'ein Lechal Ben Gadol Mizeh. You take your neshama, which is a piece of Alakus, and you force it to do an Aveda, and it says B'shas Ached Hoysav Amnite Yizbarech, and it's L'Koch Chein Amen. You're causing godliness to become, you're forcing godliness to become Tomim. Not only yourself, but Alakus, the Eibish's godliness is in Golos because of us. So in Perikei he said that you couldn't bring the Shechina into Golos, but you can get cut off. In Perek Vav he says you're not going to get cut off, but you're going to bring the Shechina with you into Golos, and you have to have Rachmanis on it. Frat, huh?
The Shechina is in Golos, no?
Evidently, first of all, the Shechina is in Golos because of Avedis in the first place. Second of all, evidently you can add to that Golos, and you could also diminish that Golos through Tshuv. And especially when one thinks, Hamaskil, an intellectual, a thinker. In other words, you think about what Hashem really is, and then you recognize what it means that the Lakus has subject himself to our free will, and because we've made poor choices, he's stuck in Golos. The Rachmanis on Kedusha becomes much, much more compounded. Each individual person, if he's shir sichli v'avanasa, go to the measure of his wisdom and his understanding, Yismar Merazeh will become bitter because of this, very much, because of the Rachmanis of Elakus, which has gone into Golos. Okay? That base. And there's another process to tshuva. The first process of tshuva is to have Rachmanis on your neshama and Rachmanis on Elakus.
How do you do that?
Think about the fact that your neshama is a piece of Elakus, and you have forced it to be involved in shtusim. Think about the fact that the Eibishter's Elakus is supposed to be in its place, which means, practically speaking, it's supposed to be revealed as godliness, and instead it's in Golos. It's sustaining us, but we don't see that it's Hashem, right? It's a big Rachmanis. When you realize what's real and what's not real, and you look how things are, it creates a sense of tremendous Rachmanis. Va'abes. And the second point is levatish, to break. Ulachni, and to subdue, ha-klipa v'seder achra, the klipa and seder achra. The klipa in yourself, and of course the klipa in the whole world. Ashakol chayu, so the whole reality of klipa, hurak bechinas gasas v'agbo. The whole reality of klipa is its conceit and its artificial upliftedness. Meshikosov, the pasuk says, "Im takbia kanesha v'gamer," it soars like an eagle. You have this in Tanya, the Perek Chof Tes. It says in Perek Chof Tes that Klippa is a lie. Klippa is like darkness with the power of suggestion. If you believe Klippa, you make it real. If you don't believe Klippa, you saw that it was nothing in the first place. When the Gemara says about the Yetzer Hara, when you don't listen to him, he looks like a toothpick. When you listen to him, he seems like a beam or whatever, like a mosquito. Klippa has no metzias. But it comes to you and says, look how big I am. When we believe it, we make it real. But Klippa is really artificial. It's a bluff. When you don't listen to the Yetzer Hara, you see the Yetzer Hara was nothing. So you have a Yetzer Hara. Obviously, you've listened to the Yetzer Hara. In fact, all he is smoke and mirrors. All he is making suggestions to you. And when you believe it, he has reality. So you want to break this artificial sense of what Klippa is. Va'abitush, va'achna ad ofer mamish, and beating it up and subduing it till the earth dust mamish. Zui misaso bitul. This is how you kill it, and this is how you break it. Va'hainu, practically, frek yankele, how do you do this? A person should have a broken heart and a crushed heart. Moreover, a person should be shamed and disgusted with himself. You should break yourself and call yourself like you have a Tanya of test. It says in Zayed, Al Pasuk, this is also mentioned in Kutei Amorim Perek Zayin. On the Pasuk, Zivchei Elikim, what is a carbon for the Eibishter? Ruach Nishbala, by breaking the spirit of Klippa. And how do you break the spirit of Klippa? Through Leiv Nishba V'nid, by breaking the heart and crushing the heart. Okay, so in other words, what is the second avodah? The first avodah is to have rachmanis on Hashem, rachmanis on your neshama, say, look what I'm wasting. Second, pashat, feel terrible, break yourself. Now you know and I know that the Rebbe is very afraid of us getting into the negative Musa mode because we may get stuck over there. But this is the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe, how this fits into our practical life, maybe we'll see later. When we get to Perek Aleph, maybe we'll talk about it, depending on how much time we'll have. Now we don't have time. But the Alter Rebbe says, a person should beat up on himself and tell himself, just like garnished. When a person breaks himself, he breaks the stranglehold of Klippa. Ki kol carbon min ha-behema. Any carbon from the behema who the Shem Havaya is. What the Shem Havaya? This is a famous Ramban. The by carbon is always the Shem Havaya, which is he midas arachim, is the midah of rachmanis. Aval the Shem Elikim to the divine name Elikim, which is he midas adin, which is the midah of judgment. Ein makriv and carbon behema. You do not bring a carbon of an animal. Kiyim, your own animal, is shabit or lahave, to break and to remove. Ruach hatumah sitra achra, the spiritual uncleanness of sitra achra. V'zeh ruach nishbara, which is breaking the spirit of Klippa. So when you bring a carbon begashmius, it's the Shem Havaya. When you bring a carbon beruchnius, it's the Shem Elikim. Or to say it in different words, a carbon the Beis Hamikdash bederach klal ruba deruba is for a shoygig, so it's the Shem Havaya. A carbon which is from tshuva, which means he did an aveda, and lav dafki he did it b'shoygig. This is the carbon to Shem Elikim, and the carbon to Shem Elikim you have to shech yourself. So he says there's two components to tshuva. One is to have rachmanis on the godliness that's been trapped in galus. Right? You know what it says? Ein angel spal metech kevedreish. Teaches the Zitcher Magid. Ein angel spal. You don't start off with kevedreish. When you think about the heaviness of the head of the shechina that's in Galus, the kevedreish, the shechinta, they touched it. The rachmanas on the Eibishter that we are not the way we're supposed to be. And the second thing is to break ourselves for becoming spiritually hardened and stiff through the Avedis and to return to the Eibishter. Now the Rebbe has this sikha that I mentioned to you before, which is unbelievable. The Rebbe says here, he's describing what you got to do. You have to have rachmanas on Klippa, you have to break Klippa. But the Rebbe says, how is this connected to tshuva? How is this connected to fixing you? How is having rachmanas on kedusha and breaking Klippa fixing you? So he says, a gewaldig. There's different ways of looking at an Aveda, and there's different ways of looking at tshuva. Okay? The most fundamental way of looking at Aveda is what says in Tanya Perek Dalet. That it's a merida merach macham HaKadosh Baruch. You're rebelling against the Eibishter. You can start speaking this Aveda is bigger, this Aveda is smaller, this Aveda is more important, this is a different thing yet. But Klolos, fundamentally, what's an Aveda? A merida merach macham HaKadosh. I rebelled against Hashem. When you look at an Aveda in terms of a merida merach macham HaKadosh Baruch, there's no such thing as a big and a little. Every Aveda is a merida. So an Aveda really is fundamentally prikasol machashmaim, throwing off the yoke of heaven, right? So tshuva would be Kabbalah sel machashmaim, to re-accept the yoke of heaven, right? But there's two levels of Kabbalah sel machashmaim. One is you have a master, yeah, and he forces you to do what he wants you to do, so he beats you into submission. La'aylam, you don't want to be makabel, you're forced. That's what the Gemara says. Avda be'efkeida nichale, a slave wants to be free. He's forced into submission. So when a yid has Kabbalah sel machashmaim, it's possible that you should be makabel el machashmaim, but you should be makabel el machashmaim with ambivalence, with reluctance. You don't really want to be makabel el machashmaim. You want to do whatever you want to do. But then the Eibishter is forcing you. Real Kabbalah Se'amach Hashmayim means you're accepting the yoke of heaven, but you want to accept the yoke of heaven. If you want to accept the yoke of heaven, you have to be connected to Hashem. And the pnimius of Kabbalah Soil is the very essence of the neshama. The very essence of the neshama is one with the Eibishter, and that from that point of view, we want to accept the yoke of heaven. Explains the Rebbe in this Sicheh, why are there two parts to the Avodah of Teshuvah, Toshev Hay, putting the hay where it belongs? Because there's two parts of the Teshuvah in the person. The pnimius part of Teshuvah is that I should connect to my neshama, to the very highest levels of my neshama. That I should connect to the Eibishter and I should want to be Makabal Machas Shemayim. And that's the idea of having Rachmanas on your Nitzitz Eliki. The idea of having Rachmanas on your divine spark is to connect to the inner levels of the neshama where you want to have Kabbalah Machas Shemayim. The second point of breaking the stranglehold of Klipa that Klipa has on you and that Klipa has Kvayachal and Alakus is the Chitzonius, the practical Kabbalah sale of doing what the Eibishter says. So the Rebbe says, here he's describing how you put the hay where it belongs. Through Rachmanis and through Hachnoah and Bitush. What does it mean practically? Practically means that a Yid renews his Kabbalah Se'amach Shemaim, his acceptance of the yoke of heaven. Practically it means I'm going to do what the Eibishter says. That's the second point. Spiritually it means I'm connecting to Hashem on a level where I want to do what the Eibishter wants me to do. Verstehst?
That's true.
The Rachmanis that you have on Nitzvah Leki. Because Rachmanis is the Pnimi Dike Inyan. Having Rachmanis on your neshama gets you in touch with the level of your neshama which is one with Hashem, where you want to do what the Eibishter wants. Breaking the stranglehold of Klipa harnesses you to do what the Eibishter wants you to do no matter what.
I'm saying there's two things that you said. There's wanting to do it, and then there's doing it, right?
There's doing it b'peil, and then doing it because you want to accept the yoke of heaven. And so these 2 points, one has to do with your neshama's deepest connection to the Hashem, and the other has to do with simply discipline and accepting what you're commanded. Says the Rebbe, these two concepts, which are practical in my life and in your life, each one of us needs to connect to Hashem so we want to accept the yoke of heaven, and each one of us must practically do what the Eibishter says. Those two parts are these two avodas: having Rachmanas on your neshama and breaking the stranglehold that Klipa has on the person. Verstanden? This is a Sicha on Perek Zayin.